Hi everyone, Jeremy here. Welcome to another episode of the Nightcast, where I sit outside at night and we listen to the crickets and I share some thoughts on the future of medicine. So, in tonight's episode, I'm going to be going over, first of all, we're going to talk about schema violations. We have to understand what a schema violation is. And then I'm going to start to point out some of the differences between functional medicine and Eastern medicine. And just know that I'm aware that this is likely a very controversial topic and that I understand that different people are going to use different tool sets for different things. And there's not one right, one wrong, right? Obviously, I've got a very strong Eastern medicine background. That doesn't mean that I'm poo-pooing functional medicine or saying that it's bad or wrong, but there are some distinctions that I want to point out because a lot of practitioners are trying to do both. And I think that there are some very elegant ways that we can do both. If you want to do both, you don't want to miss out on some key distinctions that'll help you do it with integrity, right? Integration, integrity. So I should start by talking about schema violations. And this is a term from psychology, schema violation. I prefer schema expansion. I think schema violation is kind of a weird way to put this, so I'm just going to call it a schema expansion. But what happens in a schema expansion is basically when we have a worldview, a set of assumptions, a set of beliefs, something we've kind of drawn a box around. Typically, subconsciously, we've drawn a box around some facet of reality, and we think it's unchanging, and we've got it handled. And this happens again subconsciously, and then we get exposed to either direct reality confrontation, or we get exposed to somebody else who has a different understanding, which is more expanded. All of a sudden, a dot connects. We have an epiphany, and our current schema, right, our current worldview, our current paradigm, our current framework is violated, right? But in an expanded way, it's opened up, and you get the epiphany. You get a dot that connects, right? And we now have a better understanding. We have a more expanded way to understand reality. So a lot of us are practicing some form of healing or modality where we're trying to help people get better. And the human body is a complex system which is nestled within larger complex systems such as the environment. And we interact with other complex systems like other people. And within our body, there's systems within systems within systems, and it's fractal and it goes pretty far down, right? So we have to be able to navigate that reality. We can call it whatever we want, but at the end of the day, we either get results with our patients or we don't, or we get somewhere in the middle, right? And for a lot of us, we're going to be working on getting a higher probability of success with our patients, which means we have to be willing and ready to have our schema expanded so that we can have a better and more comprehensive view of the actual reality of what we're dealing with so that we can be of better service to the patients, right? So this is just kind of the logic of how we're approaching this. So if you want an example of a schema violation or a schema expansion, I'll tell you a story from when I was a kid. And this is one of the kind of moments that just stands out to me. A lot of times, if you look back on your life, you can start to find schema expansion moments because they leave a mark, right? It's a huge trigger for neuroplasticity. Your brain goes, whoa, this is something we need to remember. So we tend to remember a lot of these moments. But I remember being a kid and my mother, I have some Italian heritage, right? And my mother was taking olive oil and she was putting it in her hair. And as a kid, I thought that was so strange that something that belonged in the kitchen was now in the bathroom. Yeah, like olive oil. In my mind, I'd never thought about it, but I'd already decided subconsciously that olive oil belonged in the kitchen. That was a kitchen thing. That's where it lived. And then when I saw my mother with the olive oil, a kitchen thing in the bathroom, I was like, what is going on here? And she was putting it in her hair. And she said, hey, this is something that my grandma used to do, right? It's an old Italian custom. Like you put the olive oil in your hair and it helps to hydrate or moisturize it, right? Something, again, I don't know the details of this because I'm not an expert on women's hair care, of course, but what I do remember is that weird feeling of seeing something that I associate with one place in a new place. And when I realized then that foods, right, could also be external body applications in some sense, right? It didn't mean I was gonna have like a pasta sauce and put it on my under eyes or something, right? It's got to be the right things, but to be able to move from context to context, to be able to bridge that, you have to be willing to get your schema expanded. Now, this happens, like I said, sometimes we're just confronted with a reality. Sometimes we have a problem we have to solve, and it's going to require the ability to jump from domain to domain and start to find out that skill sets we have can transfer. So, for example, just like the olive oil that lives in the kitchen, in my mind, in my young mind, I came later to realize that it could also live in the bathroom if you wanted to do some kind of hair conditioning treatment, right? The same thing we have is the skill set of being able to accurately diagnose somebody's complex health system, right? What's going on with this patient's body? What are these symptoms? Where are they coming from? What are the different factors that are converging to create conditions from which these symptoms emerge? How far upstream can we go? Right? There's a lot of questions we can start to ask ourselves in our pursuit of clinical clarity. And what I've realized, one schema expansion for my own self that I'll share here, is that we can develop that skill, and that's like having a very high quality olive oil in your kitchen, right? But another thing we can do is we can take it out of the kitchen. We can take it to a different room. We can take that same skill and transfer it to a different domain, which is diagnosing the complex system that is our practice. Because if we have problems in our practice, which most all of us do, right? Problems, challenges, growth opportunities, goals that are not yet fulfilled, visions for a future that we don't know how to create, whatever it is, I can tell you I've been there for pretty much all of them. Whatever it is, we can then take that problem-solving skill that we've developed by looking at complex systems in the human body, right, in the kitchen, in the clinic of trying to help somebody heal, and we can transfer that right over to business, practice management, looking at this system and diagnosing, okay, so I don't have a lot of new patients coming in. That's a symptom. Where's that coming from? What's upstream? Right? Oh, I've got people coming in, but they're churning out like crazy. That's a symptom. What's happening upstream? We can actually start to diagnose our practices. And what's really cool then is that I realized that our practice is just another living being. It's an ecosystem. Just like you, the individual human, you're actually an ecosystem of all these trillions of bacteria and fungi and viruses and everything else that lives in us, right? It's the same thing with our practice. It's an ecosystem. There are a ton of moving parts, different agents involved, right? So we want to understand the context, the complexity, all that. The better we develop our skills at helping a human heal, we can transfer that over. We can start to look at our practice the same way we can diagnose it. So that's one form of like a schema expansion. Yeah. Another one, just within medicine, and this is where I'm going to get into functional medicine a little bit. I've made a meme. I don't make a lot of memes. That may change. Maybe I'll become a real meme lord one day. But I made a meme because I've been having some very interesting conversations with different practitioners. A lot of them have an Eastern medicine background. And there's this big draw that I've noticed towards functional medicine. And I get it. Okay, I get it. I'm going to talk about this from a few different angles. I get it. Please know that I've felt a lot of these same things. The only distinction that I care to share with the profession at large is that functional medicine is basically, for acupuncturists and Chinese medicine trained people, it's basically a step down in terms of system thinking and a perceived step up in terms of clinical efficacy and potentially marketing or some kind of business success. That's generally what I'm seeing. So what we have in our pocket already, if you have a strong Eastern medicine background, is you have a framework, you have a schema for understanding health in a systems way, right? It's systems thinking. Everything's related. And we know how things move. We know what patterns transform into other patterns. We know where things come from. We know what kinds of variables are going to aggravate a problem. We can generate prognosis, even though it's not really taught in school. If you start to follow your Eastern medicine framework and you go deep, deep, deep with it, which most practitioners, when I can only speak to my own experience and the experience of the practitioners that I've mentored and helped and had conversations with, right? I'm just going to I don't know everything about every single practitioner, but so far from what I've seen and what I've experienced myself, there's a very strong desire to achieve a depth of understanding, deeper clinical understanding, deeper ability to handle complex cases, right? One of those things has to do with prognosis. We don't learn that in schools. You have to understand the medicine at a deeper level to be able to start to generate prognosis, right? That's one of the kind of outcomes of having this deeper understanding. Another one is just the confidence to be able to look somebody in the eye and say, I understand what's going on with you. We have a process, we have a plan in place, and then to be able to deliver on that process and take them through a process, right? As opposed to trying to just match their current symptoms to whatever acupuncture point, prescription, or protocol, or whatever is, you got to like answer the question of today, what are we going to do? But there's such a larger conversation happening when you can start to extend through time, especially forward into the future, right? So it's a big differentiator for the depth of study, is to be able to have a good prognosis. So a lot of practitioners want to have depth, and I understand that. I have the same thing. I remember kind of spinning my wheels and thinking, man, I really just want to go deep into something. And I didn't have the direction with Eastern medicine. I didn't have the direction of how to exactly go deeper into it. So we have this kind of quest for depth, which is important and it's good. And everybody that does really well in our profession is a lifelong learner. I think this is an important trait, to always be open to new things, right? But what I'll say is that I've been confronted with people who have deeper understandings of Eastern medicine than I do at the time, right? And there's always people I'm going to be learning from, always, right? But at these moments, just like seeing my mother putting olive oil in her hair, and something kind of just clicked for me, where I was like, oh, that's weird and different and unexpected. And then I had to expand my understanding. I've had the same thing with conversations with other practitioners who had a larger understanding. They knew how to take the olive oil out of the kitchen, or so to speak, right? So what that means is, if I was looking at a different healing system, for example, I was looking at like alchemical remedies and different things, like a sulfur of pine. And I was thinking, oh, okay, this is really cool. It's kind of a permeable agent. It can be a carrier. Maybe I could integrate this and combine it with Chinese herbs. And I was looking at it as if they were two different things, because this came from more of a Western tradition of alchemy, right? But I was talking to a friend who had a deeper understanding, and immediately he started to analyze this. And he said, oh, pine, okay, so it's from a tree, so it's wood, so it's going to and he's just started breaking it down with a Chinese medical lens. And right there, in that moment, I had a realization, which I'm sharing with you now, which is, as you start to go deeper into Eastern medicine, you'll find it's not just a bunch of herbs and acupuncture points and just like weird therapeutics like burning moxa on people's skin and doing cupping and gua sha and all that. The therapeutics are logical endpoints of an algorithm of systems thinking. We have a thought process that then, as you follow it, will churn out endpoints in the form of those particular treatments. But those treatments are not Eastern medicine in and of themselves, which is one of the arguments that a lot of practitioners make about dry needling. Oh, they're putting needles in. Yeah, but they don't know all the theory. Great. So why are we in such a hurry to throw our theory away to go grab functional medicine, right? To fill a perceived skill gap. Really quite interesting. I'm a big fan of this, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence kind of thing, right? It's like the grass is always greener where you water it, actually. The more time you spend, the more cultivation you do, you're going to have green grass around you. Now, of course, there are other ways to do this, right? Get rid of the fence and you can just be everywhere, which I'm also a fan of. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to lose our foundation. We want to have a deeper foundation so that we know where home is. And what I'm going to offer here is the perspective that not the acupuncture, not the herbs and all that, but the thought process, right? The ways of observing nature that are inbuilt in Eastern medicine. You're observing nature. Okay, there's no limit to that. Nature is a highly expansive term. The definition of nature is like everything and what it's doing. I define nature as the way things are. That's my personal definition of nature, right? Nature, the way things are. I almost wrote a book with that title about 15, 20 years ago. I thought it was going to be kind of cool to meditate on that. Glad I didn't publish it yet. I'm going to let those thoughts simmer a little bit. But for now, just consider that if we have lenses of observing nature in the form of, for example, yin-yang theory, right? Or anything with a 3, right? Like 3 burners or heaven, man, earth, these kinds of things. We have lenses that come in 4s. We have lenses that come in 5, 6, 7s, right? 8, all the way. It just keeps going. These are different ways to observe reality in an interconnected, holistic, systematic way. There's nothing that's going to be exempt from that. Everything is reality. We don't have to crunch reality to fit our model. Our model expands to encompass reality. This is kind of the crazy thing, because once your eye is really open to this, once the schema is really expanded, you can have olive oil in any room of the house, basically, right? We can use our ways of thinking to start to analyze and assess and understand basically anything. There is nothing outside of the schema anymore once it's expanded completely. Okay, so it's really kind of interesting, because I just don't see that in other models. I just don't see it. Maybe one day, but it's not today. So just know that we already have, if you have an Eastern medicine background, you already have the frameworks and the fundamentals within which you can house functional medicine. Yeah, go nuts. It's going to be great. It's going to help a lot of people, right? I'm not anti-functional medicine. I'm not anti-supplement. What I am is pro-expanded schema. And I've found the best way to get this is to not be looking at lab tests and lab markers. That can be important, yes, but they're more for confirmation than anything else. And there are limitations to what we can see with those. All kinds of limitations. Because you're only going to get the results of what you're testing for and where you're testing. And you've got timing, you've got seasonal fluctuations, you've got circadian rhythm, you've got all kinds of variability. There are so many inputs on a human that if we attach too much significance to a lab result without understanding all those things that influence that number, that day, that moment for that person, we could be led astray. We could be looking at something that's actually going to be pointing us in the wrong direction. And it's just good to be, it doesn't mean don't do anything about that, but it's good to have an expanded framework about the capital R reality around lab testing too. It doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. It's good and helpful within context. Within context. So if we have an expanded schema within which we can house everything, then that means Chinese medicine becomes our larger framework. And that means that that's home base, right? So I made a meme about acupuncturist, and it's the one where the guy's walking on the street and he's got his girlfriend, or I think it's his girlfriend or his wife or whatever, and he's walking next to her, and then there's another girl walking the other way, and he's like checking her out, and the girlfriend's pissed and she's looking at him. And I say, okay, it's in the middle. The guy's like an acupuncturist, and he sees functional medicine walking on the street, and he's got a wandering eye. And meanwhile, he's walking alongside Eastern medicine, which is where acupuncture came from in the first place, right? And it's like, this is going to be controversial. This is going to trigger some people. There's nothing I can do about that. There's always going to be some people that just want to get offended, no matter what. It's not anybody's problem except that person's problem, right? So that those people will eventually figure out that they're in charge of their own internal state to some extent, right? So they won't get triggered by a meme. But I've found that it's actually sparked a lot of lively commentary, and just it's very interesting to see how our colleagues are resonating with that, right? Because the temptation is there. The temptation is real. Some people say that they walk arm in arm with both. Some people are talking about having 3 ways with both of them and all this kind of wild stuff, right? Of saying, okay, why not have it all? Sure, take the fence down. The grass is greener on both sides. Get rid of the fence. You can have it all. Yet at the same time, I just don't see the side piece of functional medicine being on equal footing with your main love, right, of Eastern medicine. I just don't see it. And it's really only because of the expansion of the schema. It's because Eastern medicine can organize reality, not just what's going on within a human being, one human, right? But also takes into account the context, the time of year, the place, the location, the weather. All these things are inbuilt because it's holistic systems thinking. And I think functional medicine is getting there. And I think they're learning a lot from Eastern medicine. And this is kind of the irony of it, because so many acupuncturists haven't quite worked out their niche in the larger landscape of existing outside of a school, meaning running a business, running a practice, interfacing with the community. And it's like, it's hard, it's something that they don't prepare you for in the school. And I get that. I've struggled immensely with those things, immensely. But I built myself a skill set to fill in those gaps in my schema, right? So that I could flesh out my Eastern medical understanding in a way that modern society would understand, right? So I get it. If we feel like we're flailing or we're struggling or we can't, because it's going to come down to money, right? You can't run a successful business. You run out of money. You have to like pivot and do something else. You don't want to just give up on your dream of helping people. So you wind up looking for other modalities and go, okay, well, I'm going to add this to my toolbox, add that to my toolbox. Eastern medicine, here's kind of a consideration, something I'll offer you. Eastern medicine is not another tool in the toolbox. Eastern medicine is the philosophy and way of thinking that helps you organize the toolbox. You can plug in supplements, you can plug in nutrition, exercises, qigong, specific yoga practices, whatever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not that you have a toolbox with Eastern medicine in it and functional medicine and whatever else. The Eastern medicine thinking, the schema, the paradigms, that is the toolbox. And if you can't see that yet, it's because you haven't gone deep enough into those schemas and paradigms. And that's not like a put down. It doesn't mean anybody's wrong, right? And it doesn't mean I'm on top of my mountain all enlightened and pointing down at everybody. I will tell you from where I am, the view is pretty sweet, but it's because I've got an expanded schema, an expanded paradigm. And I realized that the philosophy, the architecture of organizing the box, that is the jewel within the ways that we've been taught to think since like day one in acupuncture school, right? Yin and yang, 5 phases. I mean, this stuff sounds fundamental and basic, but when you start looking, we're actually observing organizing principles of reality, right? That's not a tool in the toolbox. That is the toolbox. And what is dangerous for Eastern medicine practitioners is to not recognize what they have and then focus their their attention, right? Focus your chi, your energy onto another tool in the toolbox when you haven't yet built and defined the box itself. And this is why I'm always going on about clinical clarity and having treatment algorithms and not just snarfing up clinical pearls, right? But also taking those pearls and then threading them into a navigable web where you can take an individual patient through a bespoke journey with a prognosis, right? With a start, with a middle, with an end, and be able to navigate if-thens, contingencies, feedback and iteration. If we do this treatment and we get X, Y, and Z signs or symptoms, then we know it's working. If we get X, Y, and Z signs or symptoms, then we know we have to pivot. And if we do pivot, we're going to pivot in this direction or this direction or this direction. And there are different ways to do this. I've spoken a lot about this. I'm not going to tear into it on this little nightcast here. I also want to point out at this point that Eastern medicine represents, for me, a way of thinking, right? We have paradigms like 5 phases and yin and yang and all that. I believe, from what I've seen so far, and of course I wasn't there, right? This is a very, very old medicine, thousands of years old. But I believe from some of the things that I've seen is that Chinese medicine, for example, didn't necessarily all come from China, right? There's been trade along the spice roads. There's been exchange between ancient Greek medicine, Arab medicine, right? There's evidence of ancient Egypt having some of these ways of thinking. This is nothing exclusive to just China, for example, right? India, as far as we can tell, it looks like acupuncture itself may have come from India, maybe something earlier. Maybe there was a proto-civilization, right? All these kind of weird ancient history things where it's like looking at Atlantis or some kind of advanced civilization that had all this knowledge that then collapsed for whatever reason, and then the knowledge was scattered. What we do have today is that most of this wisdom has been housed and preserved by Eastern cultures. So we need to understand that there's, at a fundamental level, not even cultural ownership of these primary facts of nature. It is interesting that it seems like China and Eastern Asia has preserved this knowledge better, right? Like they were burning the Library of Alexandria. Who knows what was in that? Who knows how many materia medica went down? Or if there was a anatomical atlas with points, meridians, who knows? Chakras, right? They burned it. It's gone. But for whatever reason, and I'm sure there's somebody listening who's really good with history and can figure out, the ins and outs of this. I haven't looked into it to that extent, but it seems like China, East Asia, they've done the best job of preserving some of this human cultural legacy, right? That's that's beyond just like a national culture or regional culture. It's human culture, right? It's something beyond that. It's larger. And we have access to that via these lineages, right? They all kind of tap back to this larger source. So when we look at something like functional medicine, yes, it comes off a tributary, right? But it's like you're already closer to the source with the most expanded schema you can find. Don't lose that. Don't lose that. And I talk to practitioners who they've gone kind of for functional medicine, which is fine. Again, totally fine. I mean, it helps a lot of people. I've got friends that do functional medicine that don't do any Eastern medicine. It's totally fine. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's just you don't want to throw away the depth, right? Because what happens is the grass is always greener in our perception, right? So a lot of practitioners, they see functional medicine and they go, oh, well, I don't have a lot of certainty in Eastern medicine. And again, that's going to be because the schools didn't do that great of a job training you, or because there's not really like an old style, I don't know, guild apprentice type thing where you really get to have things sink in. You're just kind of like, you get taught for a test and then you pass that and then you're just out on your own with your shingle out helping people, running your own business. Or maybe you work for somebody, or there's different ways it can go, right? But there's not a lot of inbuilt mechanisms in the current educational system for Chinese medicine people that deliver a deeper grasp of knowledge, right? So we wind up kind of floundering. We wind up without a ton of certainty, not a lot of prognosis, these kinds of things. And then you see somebody working in the realm of numbers and quantities, like functional medicine. There's a subconscious certainty wrapped around that. Numbers bring that, right? Even if it's a false sense of certainty, it's still a sense of certainty. And it can become attractive when you have a perceived deficiency. If you do some soul searching and you think, wow, I don't like telling my patients I don't know. Well, you can dress it up all you want, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. We need to be honest with ourselves and with our patients, and they appreciate that, right? But on the way there, we may see something go, okay, well, it seems like practitioners who run off labs, they've got more certainty. I want to go learn that, right? Or, oh, these practitioners who are doing functional medicine, their marketing is all this systems thinking, root cause, this kind of stuff. I'm now feeling threatened because Eastern medicine has all that too. And how come these guys are so much better at talking about it and marketing it, right? I want to be able to market my medicine better. I'm going to go learn functional medicine because it's more marketable, right? So what's happening here, and there are a lot of different variations to this, but what's happening here is practitioners are taking their Eastern medicine base, which they fell in love with in the first place, right? I mean, think back, like there's so much attractive stuff to this. Like you fall in love with this medicine. There's something that draws you to it. It's natural. It resonates. It fits the way your mind works. And then when we get out into practice, if we can't quite pull it off, we're not getting the best results, right? Then it starts to erode that. And it's like, yes, I love it, but it doesn't work so well. Or yes, I love it, but I don't understand it so well. Or yes, I love it, but I can't communicate it so well. And then you go find something else that's interesting. And maybe you love that too. But why not learn how to actually shore up the communication, the marketing, like all those things, the depth of understanding around the medicine you've already invested so much time and energy learning first. It's not either or. There's a lot of practitioners and people in general get stuck in this kind of forced binary mindset. And when I make a little meme about a guy with a wandering eye who's looking at functional medicine, right? It's kind of implied that it's like an either or thing. It's not. You can have your cake and you can eat your cake too. Of course. But if we chase, if we say, okay, I need to go to functional medicine because that's going to be the answer, that's going to fill in my gap so that now I can communicate properly and be successful and be taken seriously and use a lot of reductionist terminology and very scientific words, and that's how I need to fit in for the culture here in the West, right? If we do that, that's one route. But another route is just keep the Eastern medicine and develop those skills on top. Like, why try to solve business deficiencies by switching modalities? If you have a good modality and you have a deficiency in how you communicate, how you market yourself, how you do patient education, how you talk to people, how you structure offers, like your business plan, all these things, if that's the problem, right, don't change the medicine. Look into the medicine and then look into the people that you're working to help. And you can start to develop these weak points. You can build a business around that, right? And then when you go to add functional medicine in, you're not putting that pressure on it to save your practice. Instead, you're bringing it in because you believe that that's something that will help your people more, right? It's about the people. You bring in more things for your people. You don't try to bring in more things and then try to find people that are going to want it. It's a people first approach, right? So if you've already got a thing that's helpful and good and you're getting people, but you need to shore up your own internal deficiencies about communication, marketing, all these things, right? Those are meta skills, copywriting, whatever it is, your ability to go on video or to speak like this, right? To just be able to talk openly, to give a presentation on what it is you do. All those skills you're going to need, whether you're doing functional medicine, Eastern medicine, whatever. So why make a lateral move to a different modality or even a downward move, right? Demote yourself to something you have less experience with. If you've already got 4 years plus experience in Eastern medicine, right? You've got to start. You got a significant head start on like the deep dive. You've done a full lap around the material. When we go to a new modality like functional medicine, you're starting back at square one, which I get the subconscious need to constantly be growing. I understand that there's just different levels of growth. Some people are addicted to that rush. It's like dating. Like they want to date a medical paradigm and then they want to go on and date the next one and date the next one and date the next one, right? That's why we get the wandering eye. Of course, this is one reason. But if we want to go deep, we can't jump around. We've got to actually do another lap and do another lap. And in the meantime, you may as well build up those meta skills of communication, business skills, practice models, all these kinds of things, so that if you do decide to add in functional medicine later, you've already got a nice house to put it in. Or if you decide to like jump over to it and say, you know what, I'm not doing herbs, acupuncture, I'm not doing Eastern medicine, any of that. I'm only going to do functional medicine. Well, guess what? You've already built up your skills of running a business around that. Right? So we don't need to just like jump always. The grass is not going to be green. You got to water your grass first before you take the fence down. That's what I'll say about that. That's my perspective. Something else I've noticed too, for what it's worth, is that a lot of these kind of semi-celebrity doctors and physicians that have either a Western background and they've become integrative or holistic and then stumbled into functional medicine and kind of more naturopathic stuff, or maybe people who started out as a chiropractor and got into, you know, supplements and nutrition and then functional medicine and that kind of thing. When they're out there on Instagram and other social media, they're sharing a lot of great information and they're talking about topics usually around complex chronic health conditions and, you know, mold exposure and fibromyalgia and Lyme disease and long haulers and all these kinds of things, which is good, right? They're educating people. Oftentimes when I watch their presentations, their TikToks, their reels, whatever it is, like their little videos, their lives, they put their Q&As, all these things, they go to explain a topic and they'll start where they're familiar and where they feel strong. They'll start with things like, oh, okay, well, you know, you're having a histamine reaction and they're kind of using that language, and they'll talk about whatever supplements tend to be good for this condition. And again, it's general health advice, right? And we know this is for education purposes. But very often, and what I want you to start to listen for and look for yourself, is that these kinds of folks have had some exposure to Eastern medicine to varying degrees. And it's very difficult for them to explain any kind of complex health topic without starting to borrow terms from Eastern medicine, like dampness, for example, or wind. Right? Things that if you have a strong Eastern medicine background, we take for granted as fundamentals. And these come as high context, high bandwidth terms for us. They're loaded with meaning, right? And these professional practitioners from other disciplines they've felt some of that, and they don't have a way to articulate that in their own kind of base language of whatever system they've learned. They have to borrow it from the medicine that we've learned because it's a meta schema. It's the biggest lens on medical reality. So every blind spot they have, they fill in with Chinese medical terms. So they'll say things like, well, it's, you know, here's how you heal candida, and, you know, you're going to use tea tree oil, and you got to not eat sugar. And they kind of go through the motions of that kind of stuff. And then before they wrap it up, they're going to say something about dampness. In Eastern medicine, they call this dampness. And, it's a pathological fluid. And anytime you get these biofilms, it's like a damp thing. And then you're going to want to stay off these damp foods. And all of a sudden they're dipping into Eastern medicine land, which is fine. I don't have a problem with this. Why I'm pointing this out is because you live in Eastern medicine land. If you're looking for clinical clarity and more certainty and more confidence about how to talk to people, right? And you go looking for like lab tests and numbers and all this kind of stuff. Guess what? The people who started there are coming here. Why don't we look at what we already have and just see how far we can go, how much leverage we can get out of that? And yeah, if we start getting diminishing returns, you might want to add in something else from another modality. You might want to start going on a new learning curve, which is totally fine. Totally fine. I come from the perspective of like, don't waste what you have, try not to take it for granted, because there are things that you and I learned in our first semester at acupuncture school that can make all the difference, right? That are mind-blowing for people that we just think is common sense, common knowledge. And here you've got other health professionals with credentials that we try to get by taking extra courses and extra trainings and extra certifications. And it's a cycle, right? You'd wind up in that position and then going, well, they call it dampness. And isn't that the irony, right? The paradox, because we think that our medicine's so hard to communicate because people don't know what chi means or whatever else, right? But here we have all these reductionist professionals, and they dip into these larger terms like dampness, or they talk about the organs in the Chinese medical sense, where they start talking about the kidney and the liver and this, and they'll say it, in Chinese medicine, the kidney, and oftentimes they're not exactly right about what they're saying. They've got misunderstandings. It doesn't matter. They're communicating, and people like what they're saying. So why don't we just learn to navigate our own skill set and our own terrain a little bit more, right? Water your grass a little bit more before you tear down the fence or jump over it, right? And it's possible to walk arm in arm with both Eastern medicine and functional medicine, right? But at the end of the day, I do know where the largest schema is, which is very helpful, because if we want high leverage, we need to have a reference point. We need to know what's the absolute zoom out look like. And yes, functional medicine does have a zoom in, right, which is extremely reductionist and looking at these tiny little chemicals, which is great. It's good to know, right? But you're going to have a lot more leverage if you're trying to build a house by using things at the level of scale that you can interact with, like a brick, versus trying to look inside that brick and start rearranging atoms, right? So we come to this with herbs. We already have the entourage effect built in. We're not worried about trying to like monkey with a bunch of levels and complicated supplements and things like that. It's already a formula. There's already ratios. Like, it's already harmonic. A lot of this work has been done for us ahead of time. So there's no judgment here, right? Like I said, I've got a lot of friends that are wonderful functional medicine practitioners. They change a lot of people's lives. They do miracles, right? It's not a bad way to approach things. I think it's the best version of Western medicine that's out there, right? Absolutely. And for those of us lucky enough to have an Eastern medicine background, I just hope we don't take it for granted in our pursuit of something shiny. So until next time.